Hey everyone. Welcome to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Speaker Series event created by the College of Business Diversity Council. First, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items for the general audience. All participants will be muted, so please use the chat function to interact with our panel members. We have several individuals from the College of Business Diversity Council who will be monitoring the chat. Please utilize the chat feature to ask any questions you may have for our panel. To help them identify your questions from a comment, please type the letter Q before typing in your question. The first hour for this event will be dedicated to our discussion with our panel participants, and we will reserve the last half hour for questions from the audience. Now, I would like to turn it over to our College of Business Associate Dean, Kim Foreman, to open the session and introduce our panel members.
Good evening, everyone. I am proud to introduce our panelists this evening. I'll first start out with Dr. Hannah Sions, is an assistant professor of art education in the School of Art, Art History, and Design at JMU. Her teaching and research focuses on issues of diversity and intersectionality through a critical race lens. Dr. Sions is a double Duke with a bachelor's degree in studio art photography and a master's degree in art education. Dr. Sions earned her PhD in art education from VCU. She also worked with the Metropolitan Educational Research Consortium as a research assistant, participating in the evaluation of a regional magnet school in the Richmond area, whose mission included diversifying the regional CS workforce by providing students from all backgrounds an opportunity for an innovative education. Leasa Neaves is a Senior Director, Global Enablement and Activation, Dell Synergy Team at VMware. Leasa joined VMware in January 2021 and holds responsibility for worldwide sales enablement, activation, and global go-to-market strategy to leverage the scale and reach of Dell Technologies. Leasa is an accomplished professional who has held a variety of roles in sales and marketing across multiple business divisions, spanning a 23-plus year career at Dell Technologies. Leasa also has a passion for employee growth and development and community involvement. At Dell, she led numerous professional development and women in technology programs and served as the North American regional lead for Dell's Women in Action Employee Resource Group. She has continued her work supporting women in technology by launching a new program, Connection Points, designed to drive awareness and education in support of VMware's goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Leasa serves on the Women for Madison Executive Advisory Council for James Madison University, as a friend of the Foundation for the RRISD Partners in Education Foundation, and as a volunteer for the Round Rock High School Dragonettes and Young Men's Service League of Round Rock. Leasa holds a BBA from James Madison University and an MBA from Texas A&M University. Christine Pietrowicz-Joanis has 18 years in business development and 15 years in HR consulting. She is a founding member of Puzzle HR. She has helped hundreds of clients manage their HR needs by understanding their business goals and connecting their goals to their people strategies. Christine is a leader, connector, and a change champion. Currently, she is enrolled in courses for her SHRM CP and DEI certifications. She lives in Montclair, New Jersey with her husband, Ben, and daughter, Annabelle. They are animal lovers and hope to one day own an animal sanctuary. Currently, they have 2 dogs, 2 cats, a turtle, and a bearded dragon. So welcome to our panelists.
Thank you, Dean Foreman. As many of you may know, this is the 4th event in our DEI speaker series that we put together for this semester. In the previous events, we have discussed the topics of creating a culture of belonging, recognizing implicit bias and responding to microaggressions, and becoming an ally in the fight against racism. You can find the recordings of these previous events on JMU College of Business YouTube channel. Our topic for tonight is intersectionality and a culture of belonging. And here's my first question to start tonight's discussion. The notion of intersectionality argues that privilege and oppression are always situated in multiple categories of differences such as race and gender, as in a Black woman, or race, gender, and sexuality, as in an Asian gay man. How would you define intersectionality, and why is it important to consider intersectionalities in efforts to develop more diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments? Dr. Sion, perhaps we can start with you.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Hannah Sions, and before I begin, I'd like to kind of clarify, I guess, like my standpoint. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a East Asian woman of color who is neurodivergent. So these are the intersections of which I kind of view my world, if you will. All right, so intersectionality. So as we know, especially when we're linking, my previous research was on a computer science school. So we know that the computer science field is predominantly white male, right? And so if we have say a person of color come into the space, we know that they'll most likely, whether intentional or not, experience some kind of racism. Now, if that person of color was a Black woman, then we know that she's going to probably experience racism and sexism. If that person of color, if this hypothetical person also had a disability, then they might experience physical roadblocks that might hinder their progress, which is kind of an ableist way of having a workplace. So then now they might be experiencing sexism, racism, ableism. And so as we talk about these different components of identity, which also include queerness, religion, socioeconomic class, color, age, et cetera, with each of these identities, as they intersect, they compound. And so each and every person's experiences, just because I am a Asian American woman, you cannot you can't assume anything about how they live, because there might be subtle intersections that we aren't aware of. Additionally, with each of those intersections, they kind of compound. So it's not just like this, but with each one, it comes more and more and more. So it's not just an addition of these things, but in fact, they kind of amplify the oppression that one is experiencing. And so intersectionality is about recognizing all those intersections that are possible, or those identities that are possible, and then recognizing how those intersections come together to make up each and every individual's identity.
Thank you so much. Leasa or Christine, would you like to add anything to Dr. Sion?
Just one kind of small thing, and maybe it's obvious, but a lot of the intersectionalities that Hannah mentioned are invisible intersectionalities, right? Like, you may not know what that intersectionality is, or how that shapes that person's experience. And so I think it requires us to continuously be aware of not only those intersectionalities, but some of the unconscious biases that we may have related to those intersectionalities. And as leaders and as business people, we're encountering people every day in and day out, who have multiple intersectionalities, again, that you may not even know about. So as you think about that, and as you understand people and shape your interactions with them, I think it's always just a good idea to kind of be aware of those intersectionalities, and be aware of how they shape other people's experiences, and including your experience.
Great. And I would just add one more thing, right? It's being curious, and we just need to constantly learn from each other. And if you're uncertain of somebody's intersection or what it means to them, it's okay to ask, right? And it's okay that we start having these conversations. And I think people are often fearful of having conversations about their own intersection and the stigma that's associated with their intersection. And to piggyback on what Leasa just said, we look at mental illness, which nobody can see. And it's such a stigma to talk about in today's society still, as much as we want to bring it out into the open. So I implore everybody to start to learn and ask questions and be curious, and then listen. When somebody wants to provide you an answer, to listen, And if you're uncomfortable, that's okay. And if somebody gets defensive about what you're saying, that's okay, because that's sometimes a natural reaction when somebody else is uncomfortable in a situation. And we're looking at this as a prism, and nobody's linear, and everybody has different life events that will impact how they view and perceive the situation that they're in. So I just think it's very important to keep an open mind and continue to learn from each other.
Yeah, thank you, Christine, for bringing up the notion of uncomfortable conversations, and which is a really nice segue to my next question, which is related to communication. We all know it's very, very critical that the leaders in organizations understand the unique equity and inclusiveness concerns of various intersections, and to do so by openly communicating with their employees. So how do organizations open transparent communication channels among the employees, especially between supervisors and subordinates, to talk about equity and inclusiveness among various intersections? Leasa, your organization, VMware, you guys were recently ranked as one of the top companies for a diverse workspace. Perhaps you can take this question first.
Yeah, absolutely. And VMware, I think, came in at a very high ranking on that list that you referred to. And then Dell Technologies, where I was for many years, also was like number 88 on that list. So, I feel like these two companies that I've been associated with for a long time, have a real true spirit of caring about diversity and inclusion. And so as a leader, in these two companies for a number of years between the two of them, both in high tech, as Hannah said, both of which are white male dominated industries, I've spent a lot of time thinking about and developing ways to communicate with my team members, with my peers. And luckily in both cases with Dell Technologies and with VMware, that motion is supported by the companies. It's very important that all leaders in the company are expected to kind of develop this capability. So a couple things. Christine mentioned that being comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think it's almost become a little bit of a catchphrase that we say that we have to put ourselves in that situation. But I do believe, you're talking about that supervisor subordinate relationship. It's a responsibility of ours as a supervisor to ask the questions, to listen, again, to be curious, as Christine said, to understand how things like intersectionality, things like current events impact our team members, and really give them space and psychological safety to share their feelings and their experiences with you as a leader. When you can open up that level of trust and those lines of communication with team members and within your team, you start to create that psychological safety in a space in which people feel that they can bring their whole self to work. And what we believe at both VMware and Dell Technologies was that people can bring their whole self to work. They contribute to the organization at a much higher level because they want to give much more of themselves, and they're appreciated for the value that they have intrinsically for whoever they are and whatever their intersectionalities are. I think that we also have to think about as leaders, we have the ability to create in and out groups. And in and out groups are, I think all of us have, been in high school and, seen the popular kids or the unpopular kids, right? We all know what in and out groups are. And we all know how being in the out group can impact our experience and the way that we think. Well, these things happen in the workplace too. And when as leaders, we're creating that psychological safety in our team, but also keeping that line of communication open so that it's equitable and all team members have access to the same information, and you don't unintentionally or intentionally create that in and out group, you create a space in which people, again, can bring their whole selves to work and can really contribute at their highest possible level.
Thank you for that. And Christine, as a consultant, I'm sure you are dealing with, many companies where you go in and maybe, you are asked to build these types of communication channels. Can you maybe add to what Leasa said and what you've experienced in organizational environments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things that Leasa mentioned was the safe space for employees to be able to speak about and feel some of the current events that are happening in our country. There is a lot of turmoil, and I think that's one of the key things that business owners and companies need to remember is that people are going to have different reactions and different emotions to the situations today. So first and foremost, that's number one. Number two, we're seeing a lot of organizations, we're working with a smaller company that wants resources like a 500, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 company, but they don't have the bandwidth, the depth, or the financial resources to do so. So we're helping organizations put in place employee resource groups, right? Where there's peer groups where people can feel safe. I also think in companies that are a little bit smaller, access to C-level executives is also so important if we want to start to have that level of communication. And there needs to, instead of having these boundaries where management is untouchable, they need to start to break down those boundaries and really be accessible to all employees at all levels. And again, sit in conversations, listen to their peers, listen to the employees. So those are a few things that we're starting to implement with a lot of our clients. Another piece is always surveying the employees and how they feel, right? And understanding how their managers are doing. And we've been so used to aggregating all of the data that right now it's actually really important to de-aggregate the data when we're looking at employee engagement surveys and making sure that every intersection is in the same place from a level of comfort, a level of safety, a level of communication, a level of appreciation, and feeling a level of power within the organization. So those are just a few of the things that we're helping some of our clients who don't have these large resources implement. And again, it just all goes to the most transparent way of communication. I also think it's important, and this was on another point on another question, but as we talk about events in the workplace, right, it's so important to be mindful of what type of events we have. The traditional happy hour, right? You're going to be exclusive. It seems harmless, especially in the male dominated industries, right? I was in sales. I've been in sales for 20 years. Happy hours are where the magic happens, right? But you're excluding so many people. You're excluding people with kids or daycare issues and they have to go home. You're excluding people who do not drink, right? That do not drink because of religious reasons. You're excluding people who are just uncomfortable in social situations like that and maybe have a little bit of anxiety. So you're being so exclusive when you're putting on these events, these golf outings, these happy hours, these things that just automatically exclude. So we're really trying to help businesses figure out ways to host events and meetings that will be inclusive to all. So this, as we talk about communication, it all starts here, and making sure that the communication and the inclusiveness is coming from the C-level down.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much. It's super important to make these communication channels inclusive and transparent. And perhaps we can also talk about some of the negative outcomes if they are not inclusive and transparent. For instance, things like when the minority employees, minority intersections feel like they are pressured to assimilate with the majority group. Perhaps Hannah, you can speak to that. The pressure of assimilation.
I think that that's a very complicated and personal thing because it's, give me a second, let me think about that. I mean, it's kind of from, if you're a person of color, it's from birth. You grow up, you go to school, I mean, I always use the education system as the prime example of assimilation. We're asked to sit still and be submissive and listen, that our knowledge is not actual knowledge, but rather that teachers are the ones that hold all the knowledge and we're supposed to just take notes. And it's this, and we get kind of indoctrinated with this idea of what an ideal student, what an ideal person is supposed to be like. We're supposed to be quiet. We're supposed to be good. We're supposed to be, speak English. We're supposed to do all these things. And so it's a lot more complex than just the workplace. It starts from a young age, it starts from, I remember going to school with my lunch and I'm a first generation, or I'm a child of first generation immigrant parents, and my mom would pack me Korean food for lunch and I would get made fun of that my food smelled, And so now it's bring me sandwiches, don't bring me kimbap, you know? Or I would wear certain clothing and people would ask if it was a costume instead of, you know, it being some like a traditional Korean dress. And so these things start very early. It's not just in the workplace, but I think in the workplace, it's we have these ideas of professionalism, and these ideas of professionalism are rooted in white supremacist ideals and on white cultural norms. And so it's everything from, you know, who gets to talk, who doesn't get to talk, what can we say, what can we not say, and all these things, you know. So I think that there is pressure to assimilate, but then the pressure is, like I said, it's lifelong. It's not just in the professional workplace. And part of kind of pushing back against it is to recognize to what extent we've been asked to assimilate, and then start kind of undoing those things of not, this is how I'm supposed to act, but rather, how do I want to act? Who am I? You know, and just kind of refinding ourselves. For example, I am a college professor with facial piercings and lots of tattoos. And while that seems silly, when I was a public school teacher in Rockingham County, so in this area, I had to take out my facial piercings and cover up my tattoos, you know? So there's these ideas of professionalism, like it does not in any way, shape, or form affect my ability to teach. It does not affect in any way, shape, or form my ability to be a scholar, but we're expected to have these ideas of decorum, if you will, you know? And additionally, I think though that as we talked about leadership and all these things, what's most important is if we want to create a space where our students can, or not our students, our workers can be vulnerable and be themselves without fear of having to assimilate, then I think that one of the most important things is that the leaders have to model it. The leaders have to be willing to be vulnerable. The leaders have to be willing to talk about these issues, not just provide a space for the employees to talk, but rather also voice their concerns, demonstrate that it's okay to be vulnerable in the workplace, and that they themselves are more than just a worker, but a human, which then gives permission for the employees to also show that side of themselves as well.
Can I add something to what Hannah just said? So in my bio, it was mentioned that I started an initiative at VMware called Connection Points, and Connection Points is a speaker series like this one for our team members in about a 2,500 person segment of our organization. And the interesting thing about this is I'm always the moderator. I'm the person who's talking to different people throughout the speaker series. But we have a relatively new executive, and she is she's now the leader of this 2,500 person organization. And I had my first conversation with her a couple of weeks ago, and she was incredibly open, as Hannah is saying, and very vulnerable. She talked about the fact that, you know, people see her today as the senior vice president of a large company, and they think, wow, she just like rode a rocket ship to the top. Everything's gone so well for her. But as we talked to her, what we found out is that her parents were from the Eastern Bloc in Europe. Her mother had to leave her children behind and move to the U.S. to the Chicago area. I'm sorry, her grandmother. She didn't ever learn to speak English. You know, she grew up, her parents were cleaners, which is a perfectly respectable position. They educated their children, they helped their children advance. Their children experienced a lot of hardships along the way related to poverty, inequity, and things like that. So the point was not about, you know, the fact that Sandy is now this executive, but the fact that she was open and vulnerable and told her story, and made herself seem so real and revealed some of those intersectionalities about herself that may not have been obvious. And I probably got, you know, we had 350 people listen to this session, and I probably got 25 some odd notes from people to me saying, thank you, Leasa, for having this conversation with Sandy and allowing her to be vulnerable. Subsequently, other leaders have opened up and been vulnerable in similar ways. And so again, as Hannah said, when leaders model that behavior and create that safe space where people can share their stories, then people start to become comfortable in sharing their stories and understanding that they are accepted and appreciated for who they are.
Yeah, thank you for that example. It just shows how important leadership is. And again, my next question, we're continuing on this topic of, conversations and on communication within the organization. And, it's great that, we see a lot of organizations, they try to open these communication channels. And for a lot of them, though, it's sort of a check mark type of thing. So, I hire Christine as a consultant, she's going to help me with, opening these communication channels. I check my mark so we can now be seen as a diverse organization. Is it enough to do so? Is it just, enough to open this communication channel? Or do we need to care about the continuity of this conversation as well after opening these channels? And if so, what are the challenges in continuing these conversations after we open those communication channels?
I think, there's a lot of fear, right? Within opening these communication channels, there's a lot of fear and self-reflection. People have to become uncomfortable with themselves. We're disrupting, let's face it, what educational institutions, religious communities, even some families have taught for generations is the norm, right? Straight, masculine, that's what everybody in this country was taught for so many centuries. And we're unsettling that. So I think there's a lot of fear. I think there's a lot of shame when we have, white straight males as allies or other in the intersections, power positions that are allies. There sometimes can be a shame, right? And they feel shame for what they've been taught and how they feel. So I think it's really difficult to try to take away those two very strong emotions. But we need to move forward from this fear and this shame in order to create real conversations and make real progress. And I think as we look at intersectionality, right, and we look at let's for instance, your white straight male, they automatically get categorized as in this box, but they themselves might have their own intersection, right? They might not be in the upper class. They might not have gone to an Ivy League school. Perhaps they don't come from a nuclear family. And I think more intersections that we can bring together to the table when we're having these conversations, the more vulnerable we can be, right? The better the conversations will be and the more engagement and realization we're going to have with some of the positions that are in power today to truly start to move that needle. And I really think that we need to take a look at some of those deeper intersections to help get the inclusivity of these conversations moving forward. And to your point, it is not okay to just start to create these check boxes and say, I've done this and I've done that. And that's why when you're in a position of power, you've got to continually check on and monitor the progress. And if you failed in one area, that's okay. You just have to try a different approach when it comes to creating equity and inclusion within your environment. And this is going to be a forever evolving conversation and a forever evolving topic for us. So you need to continue your learning. You need to continue your progress as an organization. So I think, but we have to also understand that there's fear and there's shame associated with this conversation, but we also have to take it and then move on. And then that's the only way we're going to have real progress is putting these conversations, these vulnerabilities on the tables and creating these safe environments for everybody. So that's, yeah, I agree, right? We can't just put the checkbox in and we've got to continue to progress, to move forward and continually check in. And ensure that everybody is still in a safe space.
Leasa, you've been agreeing, I think, with what Christine said. Did you want to add something?
I was just as she was talking, I was reflecting on again, being a woman in tech, right? How many white males, many with good intentions, or like the true desire to help, who simply don't know how to help women or underrepresented minorities or people with different intersectionalities. And I agree with Christine. I think there is a sense of shame sometimes there. And I'm not saying that we have to, create the same space for people who need to be a little bit pushed outside their comfort zones. But if you don't give people opportunity to educate and to learn and to try to make a difference for other people, then I think that you start to create a different problem, right? Which is the problem of not leveraging all the people that you can leverage in order to change people's situation. We all have a part in creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace, society, etc. And I've had so many conversations with white males, many of them executives, like, what do I do? How do I help? And sometimes, honestly, I don't know the answer. I don't know how to tell them to help, but I appreciate the fact that they're asking and that they are leaning in and making the effort and asking the question. And sometimes I do know the answer. And then when they go out and do what I told them to do or ask them to do, and they commit to doing that, I really do truly see progress. I have a leader that I worked with at Dell in sales who asked me that question continuously over a course of 2 years. And by the end of that 2 years, the entire composition of his leadership team had changed. And I mean, like, senior directors, vice presidents, presidents had gone from an all white male to an incredible diverse group of people. And he had a pipeline of other diverse people who were candidates in his organization because he kept asking, and I kept telling him, and he kept listening over time, to Christine's point, not just checking the box.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to bring up the notion of fragility as a cause for, discontinuing conversations. And Hannah, I think you have some opinions on fragility. Perhaps, you can share those thoughts with us.
I think I I believe that we should always respect other people and, meet them where they're at, and always, understand that this work is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for everybody. It's uncomfortable for me. It's uncomfortable for you. It's uncomfortable because we are, as Christine said, we're pushing against the things that we have been told is normal, and things that we have been taught is normal and right and true. And so it's okay to be uncomfortable, and it's okay to feel discomfort, but it's just kind of like anything else. Just because it's hard doesn't mean you stop. If we stopped when things were hard, or if we stopped because things made us uncomfortable, where would we be? What would we accomplish? The things that we become good at are the things that we pick ourselves up from and continue to go forward with. So even if it's, that we make mistakes and then we feel guilty and bad, it's not about, feeling bad and then shutting down. It's about, okay, I made a mistake, you apologize, you do the things you have to, and then you learn and you move forward. And it just like, any other skill, you learn to become better at it. You learn the language more, you learn how to do it better, you learn what role you're best suited for, and all those things. Additionally, I always like to challenge people when we feel moments of discomfort it takes a lot of self-reflection, but to sit with those moments and really question, what about this moment is making me uncomfortable? Why does this upset me? Is it because it's challenging my self-worth, right? Because like sometimes our self-worth is tied into things that we don't even realize is a privilege. Our self-worth might be tied into things that, whether it be socioeconomic or race, things that we don't realize is a privilege, but it is something that we didn't choose. Like some people argue that East Asians have a little bit more privilege than South Asians, because when people say Asian, they predominantly mean East Asians. So Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, And so a part of when people talk about the Asian stereotypes and the model minority myth, it's easy for me to be like, feel that moment of fragility myself and feel kind of taken aback. But really it's, with all those moments, you stop and you think, why does this upset me? Why does it hurt my, why is it hurting me? And, for me in that moment, particularly, it was the feeling that, I myself did feel like a member of a marginalized group, and to have other people say, you're not marginalized, felt very devaluing and devalidating of my personal experiences. And so then when you think about those things and you reflect, it's like, okay, well, it's not about me, right? That's another thing. It's never about us. It's about others. It's always about turning our cameras, if you will, our lenses to others. And it's like, it's not about me. It's not about me and my hurt, but rather, in the greater picture of things in this moment, what's more important. And so for me, it was actually, I was at a conference and at this wonderful talk, and the speaker had different racial categories and asked us to write stereotypes. It was like a practice, or like a little exercise we were all doing. And she actually said in front of the whole group, oh, and I don't have Asians on here, and that's intentional because there's only good stereotypes for them. And I was the only Asian in the room. And also, that's not true. I get called and jeered at and yelled at. And, I could tell you the last time it was, I was walking to campus and someone rolled down their window and screamed at me, And so I do get those experiences. And yet here's this person doing this lovely talk, saying that I don't. I only have good stereotypes. And so once again, in that moment, I was hurt, but I also remembered it's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about me going up to this lady and saying, how dare you? I'm not going to invalidate all this great work she did because of one thing she said that offended me. So instead, I went up to her. I thanked her for her presentation. I asked how I could cite her when I reference it. And then I went on my way. And I use that story as an example of not only, of course, moments that we can talk about, but also I also use that moment to talk about the model minority myth. So it does become still a moment I can use in my teaching. It just wasn't my time or place at that moment to educate someone else, And so it's about turning the camera, or the lens, if you will, to someone else, recognizing it's not about us, sitting with those moments. And finally, also, when we do have questions, Google first. We have the internet at our disposal. And while asking questions is wonderful, it takes a lot of emotional labor on the person you're asking to do it. This is my specialty, this is my job, it's great. But then I know I have friends who are queer identifying or trans. And when they get all the questions about what's it like being trans, it gets exhausting for them. It's not their job to be Google. And so if you can, we have your phones, Google it. And then if you still don't understand, then you can ask someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And keeping, that conversation going between, leaders and employees, between peers, that builds trust, right? As the conversations grow and as we understand each other a little bit more, the trust between the leader and employees grow, the trust between the peers grow, and then we get less perhaps uncomfortable about these conversations. And so then my question to you is, what are the keys in developing trust between organizational leaders and employees of minority intersections? How do we build that trust in an ongoing basis? Lisa, maybe you can provide some examples from your organization.
Yeah, I think it ties a lot to kind of something that Christine and I both said earlier, which is really being willing to have the conversation, and being willing to have uncomfortable conversations. One of the things that we sometimes are unable to do is check in with people, right? And I say unable to do because it's uncomfortable for us as leaders to check in sometimes and get too personal with people. But when we take the time to check on people, especially when significant traumatic things happen, I think it really does make a difference. And people start to believe, hey, this person cares about me. both personally as well as professionally. There's a book I love by Kim Scott. It's called Radical Candor, and it's a little bit it's not about diversity and equity and inclusion. It's about how you give feedback to people. But one of the things I really love about that book is it really in general forces you to think about having uncomfortable conversations, because there are many kinds of uncomfortable conversations, not just around DEI. But for me as a leader, it helped me build a skill that when it came time to, when George Floyd was murdered last year, when Breonna Taylor was murdered, when some of these other things have happened in society, it gave me the skills to be able to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and having those questions, asking those questions. Are you okay? What do you need? How can I help you? Do you just want me to leave you alone? Whatever the case may be. And what I found in those situations is that allowing, being willing to have the conversation and allowing my team members the space that they need to heal in the way that they need to heal has created incredible trust. Now, I just said that about, these, big issues that happen in society, but it's the same with, I have working moms on my team with little kids at home who have struggled over the last, what has it been? I don't know, 14 months now, 13 months, whatever, to manage their kids and their lives and their life on Zoom. Checking in with those team members and giving them that space for those things is just as important. And, even the good things, right? I don't want to minimize the good things, right? Somebody gets married, check in, talk to them, right? Somebody has a baby. My daughter's getting ready to graduate from college. Or high school. Gosh, I'm advancing her by 4 years. I love to talk about these things. And when we talk about these things, good or bad, it creates that kind of trust so that we can actually, care about each other personally as well as professionally and have that relationship of trust.
Christine, I'm sure you have a lot of experience with, telling managers how to build trust.
Yeah, and I think, to piggyback off of Lisa's comments and some of Hannah's comments prior, right, it really is, I think one of the things that actually needs to change a little bit is our understanding of empathy and EQ, right, especially in the business world. And being able to be vulnerable in the business world and being able to show your true self when you are going through something is extremely important. Even to the recent days with everything going on, being able to have conversations. I was getting on a conference call with one of my peers, and she was a Black mother with a Black son, and she needed to be in a moment, right? And we need to be able to let her to be in a moment because she was just terrified for herself and her family. And in certain places that would be considered fragile, weak, right? When that's not what we need to look from this perspective. I think we need to reevaluate what empathy looks like from a business leader perspective. And it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to have these emotions. I love the story that Leasa just gave about her new leader and how she became vulnerable. And then it ended up changing part of the landscape. And that's the direction that we need to move into in order to create true inclusivity and true diversity. I also think it's really important, right? When we're looking at C-level executives and leadership and management, how many times I go on a website and I still see the same 7 faces, no matter what company it is in the C-suite. We need to start having organizations really look at people of positions and power. And that needs to start, again, everything comes from the C-suite. If we don't have a C-suite that looks diverse, that feels inclusive, that is vulnerable, that is empathetic, the organization, none of the values will flow through the organization if it's not coming from the top. So, I think a lot of the conversations that we've had surrounding some of these other topics, vulnerability, open door communications, being uncomfortable and having crucial conversations, leading by example, are all things that leaders and people need to start to empower a little bit more. And that will help start to break down some of the stereotypes. Another interesting conversation that I've been having with some of my peers, right, with communication is with middle level management. Middle level management has the most interaction with employees. And in most companies, HR is not called until there's an issue, right? Employees are told not to call HR, you go to your middle level manager. But those middle level managers often have unconscious bias. There might be microaggressions. So I think organizations need to really hold their managers accountable. And, we're starting to take a look at HR really should be involved in performance reviews and looking at performance reviews and how those are being disseminated throughout the organization to catch maybe some of the microaggressions or the unconscious bias. HR really needs to be involved when it comes to the hiring practices of an organization, again, because everybody has an unconscious bias, everybody does, no matter who you are and how much you try not to be. It's just ingrained in us as humans. So I think, there needs to be oversight on a lot of the processes within an organization from other parties who might be able to start to identify some of the trends within a manager or within a particular group of individuals. Those are just some of the things that we're talking about from a communication perspective: due diligence, redundancy, peer review on a lot of these processes, so that we get multiple perspectives. I also think the biggest question, if you want to be an ally in a work environment, you need to sit around and look at the table and ask who's missing. What perspective are we missing? Are we missing somebody who might be orthodox and can't do something on a Friday afternoon? Are we missing the working mom? Are we missing a certain ethnicity? Right? We need to ask ourselves, if we want to be an ally when we're sitting in a meeting and we're sitting in a group, what perspective are we missing? And if you're missing it, you need to go get it and you need to find it.
Yeah, excellent. And I'm so glad you brought the notions of, shared values within our, diversity and inclusion has to be a shared value within an organization that is adopted by everyone. And of course, it starts with the leadership. And it's so important for organizations to identify, encourage, and cultivate those caring leaders that invest in building the trust with their employees. And of course, especially with minority intersection employees. And so how can organizations become more proactive or more intentional in identifying and encouraging leaders that care? Leasa, you want to take this one?
Yeah, or Christine, maybe Christine can start. I can see by the look on her face, she's got something great to say.
I think managers really need to be held accountable for how their employees are feeling, right? And there needs to be a scorecard on that. Coming from, you're measured on your finances, you're measured on your P&L, you're measured on the amount of sales that you bring, but rarely are managers ever really held accountable for how their employees are feeling in the work environment. And I think that's a great place to start, right? We start really doing effective employee engagement surveys. We start looking at where employees are feeling. And I get excited about this just because I don't know why I get excited about this. There needs to be so much more for a manager's performance than just, did you hit your numbers? Did you create profitability? And if we start to measure managers by their people skills, by their true people skills, and not just on numbers of retention, right, or recruitment, but we really are truly diving into these engagement surveys and we're holding managers accountable for creating these safe spaces for the employees, I think we'll see a dramatic change. So that's where I wanted to start off with, that is really holding managers and executives and peers accountable for their people skills and how their people are feeling in the organization.
Which is pretty much exactly what I was going to say. I do think that that's a really critical piece of it. And Mert, you mentioned earlier that VMware was just recognized as a top employer for diversity, and I think that what Christine was just talking about, the scorecard, is one of the reasons that happens. So all executives, senior leaders, all at VMware are all held accountable to a set of goals. Those goals range from hiring underrepresented minorities and women, having diverse candidates in the pool, diverse candidates in the interview slate. And I realize some of these things I'm talking about aren't necessarily silver bullets, right? But they're things that work together and in concert. But I think the most interesting thing on this particular survey or this particular metric that Christine kind of alluded to is that managers are also measured on how their employees feel. So there are 3 specific questions in the quarterly survey that every manager, every team member has an opportunity every quarter to rate their manager. And there are 3 questions that are considered inclusivity questions. And those 3 questions roll up into the accountability of senior leadership of whether or not we are achieving our diversity goals. Now, I realize I'm saying that these goals only apply to senior leadership, but the reality is they can never be achieved if those middle level managers, frontline managers, aren't brought along, right? So then I look at it as my responsibility, and I know other senior leaders have to look the same way, right? As to teach my people how to create those inclusive environments, and I hold them accountable, right? They have a scorecard too, maybe not as robust, but you have to start somewhere. You have to create that accountability with managers. When managers don't buy in, it doesn't happen, right? I've seen this with ERGs. If managers don't support their team members to be part of ERGs, the team members don't get involved. If managers don't support, team members becoming involved in development dialogues or whatever, these things that matter in terms of creating a more diverse workforce, team members don't get involved.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. And a lot of times we hear comments like, well, we're looking for the most qualified, employee, not the most diverse employee. We're only going to look at diversity if they're equally qualified. What is your reaction to that? And shouldn't diversity part of, or the qualification?
I mean, one of the things that we're working on with some talent acquisition strategies, right, is blind talent acquisition, where we literally will remove some of the demographic information that might be telling, whether it's a college graduation date, whether it's a name. We're literally taking all of that information off of a resume, and we're just handing them the skill sets that this employee possesses. And it's not even necessarily all about what they've done in the past, but it's about the skill sets they potentially can provide to the job, right? We're working with an organization that helps hire veterans, and some of the skill sets that a veteran might have in the field, if they put that on their resume, it's not going to necessarily translate to what they can do here in the civilian world. So I think maybe using a third party to help you do some blind talent acquisition, right, will help with the diversity and the inclusion. And you're truly looking at the skill set, not even the experience, but the skill sets and the applicable needs of the potential job. And I think that if you don't look at diversity and equity and inclusion when you are creating your talent pool, and you don't have talent strategy around that, you are missing out on a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I think that that's just kind of a lame duck excuse for not wanting to address a systematic problem within your organization, because diversity, equity, and inclusion and talent strategy should be a piece of every single business owner's talent acquisition strategy. And it's proven that the more of a diverse workforce that you have, and the more of an inclusive workforce that you have, the more innovative and the more profitable you are. And so I would challenge any business owner that doesn't want to address DEI within their hiring process.
We try to teach our leaders to think differently about candidates too. I think Christine kind of alluded to this with the veterans, right? Another great example is people who are re-entering the workforce for a variety of reasons. It could, people leave workforce for a year or 10 years. We think maybe that's unique to women, but it's actually not. People leave the workforce for a variety of reasons. And so what we try to teach our managers is that the best qualified candidate isn't necessarily the person who kind of looks like the candidate you've always hired, right? And I don't mean like their physical appearance, I mean like on paper, right? They don't always have the same skills. They don't always have the same qualifications, but they have diversity of experiences and diversity of background that allows them to be great candidates. I mean, I can say, as the 40-ish mom group, which is my peer set, although I'm over 40, but there's a lot of moms out there who do amazing stuff in their communities around organizing activities and organizing kids and volunteering at the schools and many things. I'm just talking about moms. There are lots of other examples, but these women come back to the workforce and they are powerful women. They just have a different kind of resume, and we have to look deeper and understand what that resume means and what they bring outside the box of what we think is our traditional candidate.
Yeah, thank you. And then earlier, Christine brought up the notion of allyship within the organization. And Hannah, I know you've spent considerable time researching allyship in organizations. So what is the role of an ally in an organization to stand with employees of minority intersections and help change organizational policies and procedures towards more fairness, inclusivity, and equity?
That's a great question. I think that there's a couple of things that an ally can do. I think one of the first things is to always just kind of recognize that the role of an ally is never going to be, you're not necessarily the hero in the story, you're more of the sidekick. And that's not in a bad way, but it's just that, I think that people get really excited and want to help and, kind of are like, what can I do? And then sometimes be like, oh, I could do this, but at the same time, it's not, once again, it's not sometimes about us, depending on the group, it's about the people who are going through the aggressions, microaggressions, racism, sexism, et cetera. So it's about checking in on them, asking them what they want, what they need, what they want from you and of you. And if they say nothing, then and to listen. I think that's a big one too, is to actually listen and heed what they say. A second one though is also to have your, I like to tell my students to put their bias goggles on, put your bias goggles on and, look around. Do you notice that your boss is mainly calling on the men? Do you notice that your colleague who is brilliant, but is a person of color is constantly being passed over for the white colleagues? Do you notice that, their work is second guessed, whereas the other colleagues' work is just readily accepted? If you do, say something, say something and say, hey, wait a minute. I think that so-and-so had a great idea. It doesn't mean you have to be aggressive about it. You could just say, hey, actually, I think so-and-so had a good idea. Or, hey, I think so-and-so, wasn't done talking, to, once again, use your privilege of being able to have that voice and being heard and use it for good and for support, And so I think those are two really big things. And then also, of course, it's taking on some of the burden, it's hard work. For example, I was talking to actually a colleague of mine yesterday, and she was talking about how they have, or she has gender nonconforming students and who use they them pronouns, and trans students who use they them pronouns. My friend said, what do? Do I need to correct my students every time they misgender the others? I'm like, yes. Every time? Yes. But it's a lot of work. Yes. Well, do I have to use the correct pronouns all the time? Yes. But it's a lot of work. Yes. And that's it. Even those things are to take our moment to think about what we say and how we say it, to consider whether or not what we're saying is going to come out the right way. All those things take work. And I recognize that it's a lot of work for me to, relearn how I speak. And also, if I could, that's part of that, is taking some of that burden off of the person who's going to feel microaggression. I know that by using the proper pronouns on my trans friends, that's saving them the extra aggression of being misgendered, of being not seen, And so I take on that little bit of burden because I can, because I have that privilege to choose, and because I have that emotional energy to do so. And so to, I guess, quickly summarize, it's to listen, it's to ask, it's to use your privileges for good. And what was it? The last one is to take on some of that burden.
Christina, I know you have some opinions on allyship as well. You're muted.
Dr. Sions said it beautifully. And I think, I agree. When you see things starting to happen, be the voice, take on that burden. If you see something happening, don't wait till 3 days later to go and express some sympathy, be in the moment, be there with that person. If you notice some microaggressions going on in the office, to Dr. Sions' point, if you notice that somebody isn't being called on or isn't chosen for certain projects, I think she said it beautifully. With how to be an ally in the workplace. And thank you. It was great.
Well, we are at the 7:30 point right now. I'm going to turn to Rory and see if he has any questions from the audience.
Thank you, Mert. Good evening, everybody. No, we're waiting on some questions. So I'll encourage students to put their questions into the chat dialog box for our guest speakers. And while we're waiting, Mert, if I could put a question to our panelists tonight on just to build on the topic of allyship, and how would you encourage students at college level to build allyship?
That's another great question. I say that I think it's a big part of allyship is to continue to learn. This work will never be done. It will not be done in my lifetime. I'm hoping it'll be done by my kid's lifetime because my kid is biracial, you know, and so you know, it will always be changing. Every day we're learning of new ways that people have been excluded, new histories, new, you know, things are being shed to light. And so it's about constantly learning and being, when we say we're dedicated to this work, it means dedicated to continuing to learn and to listen to others. And so, what was it? When we say, you know, when we say that we're going to continue to learn about these things, I mean it, you know, I constantly find new books to read. And so I think the moment you think you're woke or, you know, is the moment that you're starting to exclude someone else. And so it's never thinking that, oh, I'm good. I got this. Like, no, I don't got this. I have a PhD in intersectional pedagogy. I don't got this yet. And I'm still going to go and I'm going to still keep on going, you know?
And I actually think it's never too early to start. Maybe it's there. You can start teaching people to be allies even younger than college students. You know, I have two middle school boys, and my seventh grader, his pronouns are he, him, but everyone else in his friend group has pronouns of they, them, and we have a family friend who is not so friendly to people who have different pronouns or lots of intersectionalities. But what I've said to my son is that when that person says things to you that about your friends or about you know, their genders, that it's your responsibility to speak up. Like even a middle schooler can be an ally, right? Because when we start those behaviors early, then they go to college and they know how to be allies and they know how to be you know, truly inclusive, and it continues on throughout the rest of their career and their life.
And I think going on that, it's hard though, because we're once again indoctrinated and taught that like adults know and children, right? Like children should be seen and not heard, which is terrible.
Very true.
You know, right? And so it's terrible. And also I say to all of my students, you are all brilliant and smart and are thoughtful and have something important to say. Your voice matters. And so start, you know, and so we realize that the system isn't right. It isn't made for, it was made to keep people silent. And so, you know, if you have something to say, then say it. It's probably something, you know, someone needs to hear. And so, you know, you have a voice, you have, you know, these moments. And so I highly and strongly encourage you to take them and use them.
Mert, again, just building on that topic and panelists as well, here's a question that has come in. How can we be an ally for someone else when we may be too afraid to speak up for ourselves?
I think that in some ways it's easier to speak up for someone else than your own. It allows you to kind of detach yourself from it, right? Like it's easier for me to, when I see, for example, I was once in a meeting at work, not this work, other work, but I was in a meeting at work where microaggression happened from our boss to a friend. And of course, it's still always scary, but also because it wasn't about me, it was almost easier to confront my boss than if by any chance my boss was a microaggression to me. That made me feel a little bit different, right? So that's one. And two, I always say, find ways to speak speak about it as kindly as possible. You know, no one likes being yelled at. And I think that there's always nice ways, recognizing that the good intentions of others, but also letting them know that not despite, but, you know, even with their good intentions, that their impact was not aligned. I think it's a good way. And finally, I think it's really important to recognize that, sorry, I've like lost my train of thought just a bit, but I'm like, this was important, Hannah, let's get it together. So the first one was to make sure you talk to your boss or talk to your person. It allows you to separate it from it. Be kind. Make sure you use words that highlight their intention. And then the last one was, I've lost it. It'll come back to me.
Would either Christine or Leasa like to comment on how we can become an ally for someone else when we're too afraid to speak up for ourselves?
I'm not sure I have much to add to what Hannah said. I think her perspective on sometimes it's easier to speak up for someone else than it is yourself is a really good one. It may take courage too, but it definitely is a really good perspective.
Oh, I remember. Sorry, but Christine, you could go first. I'm going to write it down so I don't forget, though.
No, I just, I hope as you become an ally for somebody else, you start to get your own courage so you can become your own ally and you can stand up for yourself. And, I really think that the more empowered you become by helping other people, the more empowerment you'll have for yourself. So yeah, I agree, though. It is easier sometimes to point out things that are happening to other people and help those friends. But at the end of the day, I think it'll help you as well.
Yes, I think that's great. And also, I think that it's important to we don't know, maybe by, you taking the stand, you're setting a precedence where other people are like, oh, they did this, I can do this too. Maybe you'll be the leader in this movement. But the last thing I always say to my students is that no one likes confrontation. Like, it's uncomfortable. As much as I am known for being very honest, it's not comfortable for me either. Like, I don't like it either. But the reason why I'm able to confront people is because I've learned that it's everything's uncomfortable. Staying silent and having that eat away at you is uncomfortable, not speaking up and having that microaggression still hit you is uncomfortable. So I would rather take my discomfort and put it towards a possible solution than to just sit with my discomfort and bottle it up inside. And so if you feel discomfort at seeing a friend or colleague have, suffer from an act of microaggression, remember that you can take that same discomfort and you can put it towards action.
Thank you.
A question that comes from some of our students is, a lot of our students come from various, intersectionalities, of course, and then they've recently started their, either internship interviews or their job interviews. And of course, those students are looking for a company where they will feel safe and included. So what would you tell them, as they interview different organizations and different companies? How would they recognize whether a company is authentic about their diversity and inclusiveness versus those companies that are not so authentic?
I mean, they potentially can ask, questions about what the trainings look like, right? What does the education look like? What does a career path and development look like? I think all of those questions are easily and justly answered in the interview process. Ask them about the employee engagement and the employee benefits is such a heavy word, right? But what does the company offer from a benefit perspective? I think how the company rolls out an offer letter to an employee, how they explain their corporate culture, how they explain their benefit package tells a lot about a company as well, and whether they take time to do that appropriately or not. But I think that, they could ask some of those questions, right? And then ask about how are people evaluated, just start to ask about some of the process that happens within the employee life cycle. And then I think that you'll see the manager either get comfortable or uncomfortable, or whoever you're interviewing with, when you start to ask some of those questions. But career development, performance management, do a little bit of your own research too, which I'm sure everybody is doing, right? Look at Glassdoor, look at the company profile online, look to see how many people are in leadership of different backgrounds, and what the leadership infrastructure looks there. I think you can get an idea of how sincere they are by taking a look at literally taking a look at the demographics of the organization and what you see when you walk in.
I think another adding on top to what Christine said, another thing that we've done is we have actually, I guess the best way to describe it is a reverse interview. So we actually have in both Dell Technologies and VMware, we've had the same thing. We have like a group of people who are women, or part of our women's ERG, or part of our Pride ERG, or part of our Black ERG, or whatever that employee resource group is. And those people are available and willing to have reverse interviews. So, someone could, if I'm one of those volunteers who's in that group, someone can ask, hey, I'd like to talk to someone about their experience as a woman at VMware, or I'd like to talk to that person as someone about their experience as an LGBTQ team member at VMware. And we have literally people who volunteer to do that, and we facilitate that through our recruiting process. It's mostly when people ask for it. We don't necessarily offer it up, because we obviously, these companies interview lots and lots of people every day. But it is a good barometer. And if that's not a formal program, you can ask the questions. You can ask it of a leader or an interviewer, as Christine said, and try to use the network that you have, and can create I'm a big advocate of LinkedIn and networking through LinkedIn, and I'm amazed sometimes how people will just take the time to talk to you and answer questions, simply because you ask them, because you have some connection, because you're a JMU alum, or you're whatever the case may be. And I know sometimes it's hard to make that request, but I'm often really pleasantly surprised at how people will have those conversations, will give you the really is of an inside view.
I would also, you guys, that was, such great responses. But I just also want to add, from one person of color to another, or from one person with lots of intersections to another, that it's most likely unavoidable. It is, it's almost unavoidable that you are going to, there's no workplace that's perfect that I think anyone can walk in and not experience microaggressions or racism or sexism or some kind of prejudice. Like, I can look at any female in higher ed and be like, you've probably had some sexism, and they're all like, yes. I can look at most women in business and say, you've probably had some kind of sexism, and they're just like, yes. Like, it's going to unfortunately be will happen. I'm not saying all the time, but it will. And so I think what the other panelists really clearly pointed out was that might be something that we can't, prevent. However, great leadership and great bosses who will then protect you and ensure that, things are put in place so that you don't have to experience it again in that same manner. That is where that's where you're in a great place.
Mert, we've received another question in from one of our students, and it's, what types of resources have helped you in your ability to walk alongside people in diverse groups? And the student is using books or podcasts as examples.
I think those are great examples. I spend a lot of time, especially over the last year, walking my dog. and constantly listening to books and podcasts and things like that help me learn. But I think a lot of just educating yourself and keeping that open mind as you're listening and exploring different resources. I do know once you get inside a company, many companies have ongoing education and BRG-led programs or business-led programs where you can listen and learn. And you have to take advantage of those things. It's easy to get busy and not make the time, but really when you make the time and lean in, there are lots of resources out there that can help you learn. And actually, for college students, you're already in that mode of learning. Don't lose that. Keep that going as you move into your career.
I've got a bunch, and it really depends on what you want to learn about. My email is my last name, sciencehk@jmu. So if anyone wants, you are more than welcome to email me. But just off the top of my head, I would recommend How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. I like a lot of history to understand like where we came from, why are we here, and how did we get here. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander is a great one for that. I also really liked, what was it? I'm trying to think of all the ones I read recently. I also read like a lot about like the school to incarceration pipeline. So that's Push Out would be a good one for that. When you're talking about specifically race and racism, I know it's kind of like outdated, but like critical thinking, I think some bell hooks, like teaching community, teaching critical thinking, that's a great one. I mean, I always love bell hooks. As for podcasts, I had my students listen to 1619, the New York Times 1619 project, as well as Nice White Parents, which is another really good one. And then finally, for movies, I really recommend 13th, which is about the 13th Amendment, which abolished enslavement, but then also then about how mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow. And then second, and then also Michelle Alexander's also in that one, which is brilliant because I love her. And then the other one I recommend, it's about, so critical race theory is a theory that argues that racism is embedded into our legal system and into all parts of our, like laws and systems. And so one of the documentaries I really like that showed it, it's called Grass is Greener. It's about marijuana, I'm sorry, but it follows marijuana as one thing and talks about the legislation, and we see how much racism impacted how legislations and things were built. And so I think it's really important to, see these histories, see the extent of how much racism and bias has impacted our society as we know it. And then that's where we go from there. But if you want any more, like, please do not hesitate to reach out. This is what I do, and I always find new things that I love to share. So I'd be excited to share if anyone wants.
Thanks, Hannah. Mert, if we have time for one more question.
Yeah, sure. We got another 5 minutes.
Okay. As assuming, of course, Christine, you did want to come in on that last part of the conversation.
I was just going to Kimberly Crenshaw, right? For obviously we're talking about intersectionality. So she's obviously a great resource for this topic.
Thank you. The other question that has come into us, and again, it returns to the topic of building allies. When attempting to build allies, what are some strategies you may suggest when you're dealing with a superior, dealing with a boss who is intransigent? Who'd like to take that one first?
I'm sorry, what was that last word you said?
If intransigent. Don't make me spell it.
I think you stumped us all there with that last word, but I think maybe we
get
the idea.
Yeah, so a boss who is very set in his or her ways and just won't move off his or her opinion.
Yeah, it's tough for sure. And I think, it's tough, especially when you're in the situation that you have to try to do that with your boss specifically. One strategy is certainly building allies elsewhere who can help you. I'm just a relationship-based person. I try to build relationships wherever I am. And I think that when you build relationships, you can convert sometimes those relationships into allyship when you need allyship. So, sometimes, especially when it's your boss, it's really difficult to make that change and to have an influence over how that person approaches things. But when you can make a relationship and a connection with one of their peers or someone else who has influence over them, then perhaps you can use that person as a secondary ally to help kind of change that attitude from your direct leader.
Thanks, Leasa.
Obviously, I don't have as much experience in this one. I only have personal and or things I've seen from my friend. So it may not be the right response, if you will. I think that, Lisa's correct that we need to find allies. We also, like, if you're the person who's experiencing the microaggression or the aggression, I say find your people, find the people you can be unapologetically yourself with and to, and that will support you, validate you, uphold you, and be your ally. If you are the person who is experiencing this and this is an issue, I mean, usually we don't have one direct boss. We have HR, they have other bosses, there's other modes of chain. And, once again, I don't know if this is the answer that everyone thinks is correct, but that's what, if I was watching a colleague go through something and my boss wasn't responsive, I would go, my thing would be I would go to the next person I can go to, or I would go to HR, or I would go do something, because in my mind, it's intolerable. Like, this is not okay. It's never been okay, but it's not okay. And unfortunately, these are the things that need to happen for change to happen, is that we need to let people know that, hey, I know you're in your mind, you're thinking, well, I've always done this, so it's okay if I keep on doing it, but it's not. And so we need to start. It's a lot of hard conversations. It's a lot of hard actions. It takes a lot of courage. I recognize it's a lot of courage. And also, those are the things that need to happen for if we really want to change the culture in our workplaces.
Yeah, and I to reiterate what Hannah and Leasa have said, one, definitely find your people within the organization, right? Find your peers, find others, right? And if you can't, and you do need to escalate it. Like we go back to the words of what is stopping some of these conversations: fear, right? It is very scary to go to HR or go to the next level manager to report an issue. But if the C-level, again, we talk about the organization and the culture and the shared values, and it has to come from the top. And if these things are not addressed and they're not spoken about and their action is not taken on them, it's just going to continue, and it's just going to continue to get worse, and we're not going to have any change. So Hannah is right. You should go to the next level of management or whatever your process is within the organization to make a complaint, and that's absolutely what you should do. And if we don't do that, even though it's fearful and we're scared of retaliation and we're scared of a lot of things, we need to do this in order to move company cultures forward.
And lots of companies have hotlines, right? So like if you don't have a specific person that you can go to or talk to, lots of companies have, ethics hotlines or HR hotlines where you can anonymously, bring the issues up and let them be investigated without putting yourself potentially at risk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rory, for bringing the questions from the audience. We have one final question, which is sort of a homework for the audience. And so for each of you, the panel members, what is an action that a audience member could do this week to work towards becoming an ally for various intersections?
Learn about something, a history or an experience of someone that you didn't previously know of, but that you want to without asking them. And like take some time too. I'm not talking like a 5-minute chat with someone or a 5-minute Google session. I'm talking like watch a documentary, listen to some podcasts, and or read some book chapters or articles.
Hannah mentioned earlier that we have to really be thoughtful about and recognize our own biases. And I think what I would ask each of you to do is, we know we have biases. It's part of being human, but the next time you walk across campus or walk down the street and you feel one of those biases click in, question yourself. Question why. Why did I think that? Is that right? Am I making an incorrect assumption? For me, that has been a life-changing tactic in terms of how I see other people. When I'm thinking in my mind, I literally, like, I see somebody drive by and I make a snap judgment about whatever. And I ask myself, why? Why did you think that, Leasa? And it really has helped me transform how I think about other people and how I interact with other people. So I would encourage you all to do the same. And it's easy. You can do it any interaction with anyone.
Yep. I love both of those suggestions. And then to piggyback on the previous conversation, take a burden off of somebody, right? If you see take somebody's burden this week, and let them live in their moment, and you take a piece of what they're going through away from them. A little bit of the burden.
Well, thank you all so much for this lively conversation. We appreciate all of the insight you brought to this panel. I hope that all of our audience took away something that they can use in their lives going forward. And thank you again, and have a nice evening.